Hello, welcome to Inside Politics on A News. My name is Anastasiya Lavrina and today we have a very special guest. Joining me now is Professor Brenda Schaefer, a faculty member at the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. Dear Brenda, warm welcome to Inside Politics.
Thank you.
Thank you so much and welcome to Baku. In our today's edition, we are going to speak about Syria's energy sector, which was heavily affected during the civil war, which lasted more than 10 years, and the future expectations from the energy development, participation of the superpowers, regional powers, and I'm also planning to ask a couple of questions about the post-conflict development in the South Caucasus. Let me start with a simple question on, given the extensive US and EU sanctions on Syria, what realistic paths exist for rebuilding its energy sector and infrastructure?
Right, so far the United States has put a waiver on the Syrian sanctions for 6 months and the EU for a year. And of course, it's extremely important to get energy supplies into Syria because you can't, stabilize or jumpstart an economy. You can't provide heat to the population if you don't have basic energy needs. Water pumps, it's so essential. Syria, prior to the civil war, was actually an energy exporter. It was exporting oil. This was the main source of revenue for the government. Its natural gas reserves were growing, and when the civil war broke out, this was diminished, and Syria became completely dependent on energy supplies from Iran. Iran would bring, depending on the month, between 60,000 to 100,000 barrels a day of oil, basically for free. It was on a credit line, and so this free oil is gone now. But I believe Turkey and Qatar now are working very hard to get the electricity started. Azerbaijan is also, with its massive shipments by truck of aid, including food supplies, fuel supplies. And I think Azerbaijan is one of the only countries now on the ground in Syria and I believe Azerbaijan will play a role in restoring the electricity in Syria.
If there is any potential for green energy development and renewables with the help of Azerbaijan, which already has an experience in that, I do remember you published a very interesting article on this particular topic, and there was shown that when it comes to electricity and green energy, that's not so much developed in Syria.
Right. So, I assume right now with the very urgent situation that most of their energy will be based on fuels, and even, electric, probably even very low amounts of natural gas and like for electricity mainly actually, on diesel or other actual fuel, which is a very expensive way to produce electricity. But I think in the current situation, they'll probably take whatever they can get. There's some ships. Qatar and Turkey are sending electricity ships, power ships. It's a very big business that Turkey has around the world of these power ships, especially in Africa. So this could be a very good emergency solution. And I believe it's even possible to think eventually of some, energy trade flows in the region. In 1921-22, there was an agreement negotiated that Egypt would import additional gas from Israel, and at the same time, Egypt would begin gas export to Syria and to Lebanon. So we could kind of imagine where these molecules were coming from. But all the players agreed. So I think when it comes to energy, which is so essential for basic modern living, we could even see some interesting gas trade flows in the region, electricity flows in the region that even involved Israel, Egypt, and Jordan, and others.
Now Syria is trying to restore its relations with other countries in the Middle East. How is the situation with Israel now? Do you expect two countries to find a way to approach and work even in an energy sector together?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, even though it may seem far-fetched for a couple of reasons. On one hand, when they set up their initial laws about entrance, they said that no citizens of Iran or Israel can enter Syria. So it sounds like you could say, well, this doesn't seem like a regime that's going to be friendly to Israel, right? But during their civil war, Israel had a policy, it was called good neighbor policy, and any any injured person that showed up at the border, they would go through checks of Red Cross that they didn't have any weapons or explosives or something. Any person that was injured in Syria received medical care, and a lot of these included people connected to the, from the Al-Nusra forces, connected to the current new government in Syria. So many people know that there was this depoliticized aid. And there was also during the Civil War, any village near Israel that wasn't allowing terrorists to attack Israel would receive from Israel fuel, water, food, medical care. Villages that attackers came from Israel didn't receive this aid. So they know there was a good neighbor policy that in the past. So I still think there's great possibility. And of course, with the high influence of Turkey over the new government in Syria, Turkey and Israel have had ups and downs, but it's never been a real confrontation between these countries. And I think clearly the new situation in Syria is to the benefit of the mutual interests of Turkey and Israel. Removing Iran and Hezbollah from Syria is very good for Turkey. It's very good for Israel. And I think there's a high possibility that the Trump administration will remove its forces from
that was
American
my next
forces.
question, actually.
Yeah,
we do know about very serious oil and natural gas sources are basically located in the eastern part of Syria, where they're largely under the control of the predominantly Kurdish people's protection units, let's say. And we do know about the tensions between Turkey and this organization which is being considered as a terrorist movement. United States presence in that part is also significant, but if Donald Trump may decide to withdraw its troops from Syria, how do you see the future perspectives and Turkey's influence and Syrian government's presence in that area?
Right. So it was always a wrong American policy to build its alliance or its activity in Syria on a minority group, which many of the members are connected to PKK, YPG, a terrorist group that attacks a NATO member, Turkey. Of course, this was a illogical policy that you work with a terrorist organization instead of a state that's your ally. Even if it wasn't a terrorist organization, that you work with a very small, not very powerful group that becomes dependent on you. When Assad's troops, when they withdrew from their positions in Syria, they gave their positions to these YPG members. So it tells you, really that who they're with, and it really is not in the American interest to continue to work with this group. And I believe that with Trump's approach, that instead of having these American forces in Syria where they're actually vulnerable they're more of a target than actually being able to be an effective military force, I believe Trump will remove these forces. And of course, this will be in some kind of coordination with Turkey or deep coordination with Turkey. And
probably with a new government of Syria.
Right. So it will be, it will be orderly. And there will be, and I believe the new government in Syria has no interest to hurt minorities because they're trying to establish their credentials, their credibility in the international stage. And I think they've been very careful to show that, they will not harm Christians and other minorities in Syria. Of course, things can, it's a new regime and some things can happen, but I think their intention is to try to protect the minorities.
Let me ask you one additional question about political situation in the Middle East. Gaza deal expectation, the future priority for peaceful development of the region. Do you connect on what is happening in Gaza with the future development of Syria? How this may affect the cooperation between Israel and Syria?
So no, I think, a lot of times you hear different forces in the Middle East and what they explain what they're doing. They say, they're doing it with solidarity with Palestinians. But, it's really just a rhetoric. Like, let's say Houthis, they've been attacking major shipping from 2019, like not connected to the Gaza war, nothing connected to Palestinians. Houthis are a tool of the Iranians, and this was just a way of Iran projecting its power, showing that it can disrupt international shipping. It has this power. Or I don't have to tell someone from Azerbaijan that, you know, when Iran talks about Muslim solidarity, but all arms that went to Armenia for 2 wars went either through Iranian airspace or through Iranian, by, you know, landing at Anzali port in Iran and going by trucks, you know, into Armenia. People in Azerbaijan know, it's well documented, that during the 44-day war, Iran sent forces into and cut the Azerbaijani forces in between Jibrail and Zengilan, and even Azerbaijani forces were killed because of this Iranian intervention. So regimes talk about solidarity, it's about Palestinians. Most groups everywhere just care about their own interests. So I don't think the Syria situation is linked to Gaza, but what is linked is that with the destruction of Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Assad regime just fell, you know, like a snowflake. Not, you know, with not even one bullet, with one shot being fired.
And definitely, it's also affected Iranian position.
Right. And so it just showed you, without this military power, there was nothing there left of the Assad regime, and as you say correctly, nothing left. You know, Iranian influence, so-called influence throughout the region, was all built on force, you know, of its proxies, mainly of Hezbollah, which were very serious fighters. Once those forces were disrupted by Israel, then the Syrian regime just fell. You know, and now the question is about Iran. It's also, you know, they sent several barrages of missiles at Israel. When they themselves had no serious air defense, but Israel even illustrated to them that whatever this S-300s they have were quite useless when a modern air force is addressing them. So they've left themselves completely, you know, vulnerable. I'm really curious, what is the decision making going on in Tehran? How in this situation, when they have no air defense, but are continuing, you know, to threaten other countries in the region.
Talking about the past experience of Syria and the future expectations, Russia had also its own interest in energy market of Syria, and there was even one company, Soyuzneftgaz, to explore the fields in Syria. But now the political situation changed, which mostly affected Iran and Russia, with an interest of the Western alliances, Western powers like United States and France, probably through Total or many other energy companies, to increase its presence in Syria. Do you expect Russia will also find its place there?
Right. So, you know, I think the new regime, it's complicated towards Iran and Russia. So first,
but there was an intention to have relations with Russia.
So it seems with Russia that on one hand, because Russian forces had helped Assad stay in power, they had killed many Syrians. On one hand, they're not thrilled about Russian presence, but I think especially because of the Turkish approach towards Russia, which is always very pragmatic. You know, Turkey always understands we're Russia's neighbor, and so whether it's in the Black Sea or whether it's related to minorities in each countries, and I mean, Turkey always has a very practical approach to Russia, so I wouldn't be surprised if Turkey encourages the new government actually to have some kind of pragmatic policy towards Russia. But in terms of energy, I think that many Western companies will, once the sanctions are removed permanently, right now with their waiver, I don't think countries can take a risk to go to Syria, but there's really no justification for sanctions when the Assad regime is no longer, in power. But, I assume that offshore of Syria and also Lebanon is rich in oil and gas, just like offshore of Israel is, Cyprus, Egypt. It's logical in terms of the geological formations. I know there is always in the industry a lot of interest in the offshore in Lebanon and Syria. So I think, that sector can be revived very quickly.
Right, especially because you had a special meeting on Monday, if I'm not mistaken, on the possible lifting of the sanctions on Syria. So France already made a statement saying that it will definitely support the future development of the government. Who do you expect, and your personal understanding of the situation, who should invest to Syria mostly now for rebuilding of its infrastructure when it comes to energy market? Do you expect any particular companies?
So I think the ones that were in Syria prior to the civil war, like Total you mentioned, Shell, that will have a leg up, probably especially Total because of the French legacy in the Levant, that they seem to have a special interest and knowledge of how to work in Syria and Lebanon. So you could see it. And then, you have a lot of majors already now around the region, that it's always very interesting if they have business anyways. And who knows, maybe SOCAR. I mean, I can definitely see Azerbaijan working on the electricity, gasoline stations, definitely the infrastructure in Syria, and maybe possibly also for offshore activity.
A bit more about the position and your personal expectations from Azerbaijan in Syria. Do you expect that doing that, Azerbaijan will definitely increase its presence in Syria, in the Middle East? And how exactly should Azerbaijan work independently or in partnership with the Turkish companies, probably, to make sure that it benefit the future of Syria, Syrian people, and its energy policy, of course?
Right. So, Syria wasn't really, Azerbaijan during the period of the civil war, mostly kept its distance from Syria. And as maybe many of I'm sure you know, but for your listeners, that Armenia actually even had military forces deployed in Syria, almost there to the last day before Assad left, deployed together with the Russian forces. So Syria was not a country that Azerbaijan had sort of a natural inclination to develop relations with. But now with the new regime and the strong Turkish influence there, yes, I think is going to be a strong economic and energy role for Azerbaijan, and maybe even beyond if if there's any foreign forces there or something. I mean, they're trusted by all the sides, and I think that's it's very important that that Azerbaijan can really. Because it's trusted by all the governments around Syria, it can play a good role there.
Definitely. Officially, Armenia and Armenian experts prefer to say that the situation in Syria does not affect Armenia at all. But how do you see how the change of the regime, the fall of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, affected Armenia itself? Yes, they had a huge diaspora in Syria.
Right. So on one hand, like I said, the new regime in Syria, new government, is trying to be very friendly to the minority communities, including the Armenian communities, mostly based in Aleppo, Halab, in Syria, and to make sure these communities are safe. But just like they don't forget that there were Russian forces occupying their country, I think they don't forget that there were Armenian troops together with these Turkish forces occupying their country and supporting the Assad regime. So I think Armenia starts out like in a negative image for the new government.
Well, the situation in the South Caucasus, Azerbaijan is still working hardly on to achieve the desired peace for everybody here, not only for Azerbaijan itself, but also for the region, working closely with Turkey, with the South Caucasus countries like Georgia, and still trying to pursue the Armenian government that the peace will benefit Armenia also. What is your vision of the post-conflict development of the South Caucasus? Do you think that we are approaching this last moment when two countries may sign an agreement, or due to the position of Armenian government here?
Well, it's interesting you ask this question, because in some ways it is interconnected with developments in the Middle East, because the only truly strategic backer, a reliable strategic backer left to Armenia is Iran. In the war with Azerbaijan, Russia is not going to fight for Armenia. And Russia supports Zengezur corridor, for instance. They see that this would be positive for the region. The only power against it is Iran, that has the same position as Armenia. And as you know, it's a period of rapid developments for Iran too. What happened with Hezbollah, with Syria, what's happening now with Houthis, basically Trump will, even just by threat, is able to close down their activity. But if they even do one attack on a ship, I'm sure the U.S. Navy will respond under Trump in a way that, you know, that the Houthis have not experienced in the past. And then, of course, this conflict can also spread to Iran itself. So Armenia could lose its strategic backer, or the ability of its strategic backer, Iran, and that could affect its calculations. And I hope also that, you know, the wild thing about sort of the Armenian formal opposition to opening up the Zengezur corridor is that Armenia would benefit so much from this. I mean, that having trade with Turkey, Azerbaijan, Central Asia, I mean, this would be a great opportunity for Armenia as well. So I hope they will see these interests. I think there's also a very big gap between what the Armenian lobby organizations in Washington work for and what Pashinyan and people in Armenia work for. I think the people in Armenia are much more pragmatic than their diaspora that sits, you know, in lovely homes in California and in New Jersey and New York, and it doesn't pay the consequences for war or for, you know, economic isolation. So hopefully the state itself will prevail over its diaspora in this case.
All right, especially for the future, Azerbaijan, just a couple of days ago, the president of the Azerbaijan Republic made another statement highlighting the importance of transport communication development in the region, Zangezur corridor. Armenia, in according to the trilateral statement signed in November 2020, agreed to work together on the opening of Zangezur corridor, but still we do not see the result. In its own way, Armenia tries to promote another project, Crossroad Peace, if I'm not mistaken, which will also include Iran. As it was mentioned, that project seems impossible without Azerbaijan. So, talking about the future, transport, communications and energy links in the region, where do you see we may stand in some months?
Right. Again, I think it's interconnected to Iran's power in the region. If Iran's power wanes, then obviously Azerbaijan will not have a country behind it, you know, to stop a lot of these initiatives. And it just depends if Pashinyan is willing to take some political risks, because again, interconnection is kind of funny. Countries always want roads, rail to go through their country. Like you see this all the time, competition between, let's say, routes from India through Saudi Arabia versus through Iraq to Turkey. You know, all sorts of competing, you know, northern corridor, middle corridor, you know, all these competitions. And Armenia would benefit from being a part of this road. They can figure out ways that they can also protect their sovereignty, but it just you need sometimes a bit of to be brave and to say, yeah, I'll take some domestic political risk, but do something that's good for the prosperity of my country. So,
and my last question: Donald Trump is back to the White House, and just before last days of Biden's administration, there was a strategic partnership agreement signed between the United States and Armenia. And now is a big question what we should expect from Donald Trump's administration during his president term in regards to the South Caucasus post-conflict development and the future, whether he is willing, in accordance to his past experience, to work separately with Armenia, Azerbaijan and Georgia, or there should be one single approach to the South Caucasus?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a radically different approach, or there already is, of the Trump administration to this region, to Iran, to Russia, Ukraine, to energy, you know, in general. I mean, I think first thing, the Trump administration is 100% supports development of fossil fuels, you know, natural gas. I think things,
drill,
for
baby,
instance,
drill.
Yeah, drill, baby, drill. I think even things like part of the obstruction to the expansion of the Southern Gas Corridor is that there wasn't public finance available. So I'm sure under Trump, and especially the nominated Secretary of Energy, who's an incredible energy professional, Chris Whitewright, I think that they will encourage, or, you know, as the main donor to the World Bank, the return of public finance, at least for natural gas projects. So on the energy level, this is going to create a new reality, right? It wasn't, and I think they'll value more a country like Azerbaijan, which is an oil and gas producer, where under the Biden administration, being an oil and gas producer was something dirty, something nasty, So I think that's changed. I think definitely this new administration will not, has a completely different vision than the Obama/Biden administration had on Iran, which is basically the same policy. And so, of course, the Biden administration was attracted to Armenia because Armenia had good relations with Iran. Trump administration is going to be quite a liability. Armenia's close cooperation with Iran is a liability in terms of the Trump administration. So, everything has changed. And I think, we're basically more regionally, we're seeing like the rise of Turkey and its allies like Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. We're seeing a big shift where this rise of a Turkic alliance, and it's at the detriment of Iran in the region. And with Iran, if its ally is Armenia, this also decreases the power of Armenia in this region. So, if you look at the Trump team, especially like the Secretary of Defense, Hegseth, the National Security Advisor, Walt, these are people that are unequivocally, for instance, supportive of Israel and will not take any disruption from Iran on a military level to the U.S. and its allies. Like, there's no game here. So it's, things have really changed, on the ground before Trump was inaugurated, with the fall of Syria, the fall of Hezbollah, but on the geopolitical level, with a completely different change of U.S. policy towards Iran, the Middle East, probably also a winding down of the Russia-Ukraine wars as well, to some sort of ceasefire, probably in coming months, that Trump has been pretty clear about. So.
Right. So, Brenda, thank you. Thank you so much for joining our program today.
Nice to see you.
Thank you. Just to remind, you watched Inside Politics. Today we had a very distinguished guest. Joined me, Professor Brenda Schaefer, faculty member at the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. My name is Anastasiya Lavrina. Dear viewers, do stay with A News and see you in the next edition.